To my talk. My name is Claire Preston, and I've been teaching ESOL for 15 years. I've taught children all the way up to adults in both Spain and the United States. And today I'm going to be talking about how lots of methods to get our students talking. I'll be talking about the importance of verbal communication as well as the lexical approach to language acquisition. And I'll go over a lot of methods, how to arrange groups, how to structure activities, and how to set the tone to benefit newcomer all the way to advanced levels. So first of all, the lexical approach to language acquisition, it talks about chunks of language. These are also called functional phrases, essential language. Some examples are sentence stems and sentence frames. And the idea is that it is important for students to both understand and produce lexical phrases as chunks. And so this allows them to perceive patterns of language, and then they have a set of words and they can substitute other words within those functional phrases. So it's actually a memory improvement technique, and it allows the brain to process larger amounts of information. It also allows your class to cover plenty of information quickly. With native speakers, we often just know the correct grammar, but we can't explain why, and that is because of this concept. We know common phrases, so we're accustomed to the sound of words together. We know what is correct and what is not. So once students have these building blocks, of essential language, then they can begin to build fluency. So one example of this was when I was studying Spanish, and you just learn little phrases like "que te vaya bien," and that means hope your day goes well, and it just helps you to sound fluent more quickly. Also, I have been surveying my students over the past month in preparation for this talk, and for all of them, the most difficult is language production, so both writing and speaking. For newcomer levels, it's probably no surprise that they find speaking the most difficult, and then for advanced levels, they find writing the most difficult, but both are connected because they are production. So it's important to set the tone, and ambiance really helps. You can use lighting, you can use music. Make sure it doesn't get too loud in the classroom, but encourage fun, laughter, and it needs to be gentle, comfortable, and encouraging to all students for them to feel comfortable speaking. Also talk about the why of the activity. That helps students to buy in. And so an example of the why of speaking is that it builds community. I talk to my students often about how, in our classroom, we speak many different languages, but when they leave the room, the people within our classroom are the ones who understand the experience of moving to a new culture and not knowing any of the language. So I just really reinforce that this is the family in our classroom, and so we use conversation to build community. Also, this is a specific skill set. It's surprising how many times I get called to the office to translate for languages I don't understand, just simply because I have the skill set of understanding, deciphering different accents, but also figuring out how to communicate cross-culturally is a skill set. Also, classroom culture is so important. It may seem time-consuming, but it will save time in the long run if you can front-load these activities and really build classroom culture. So one of the things with classroom culture is students sometimes giggle when they hear an accent that is different from anything they've heard before. And laughing at each other's accents is really going to shut people down and make them not feel comfortable. So I explained that, of course, everyone has an accent, everyone in the world. And so we don't laugh at accents. Also, I like to celebrate both formal and non-formal language because our students need to develop both in order to make friends as well as for job interviews, etc. So it's just important to distinguish between the two. Say, "Ooh, that's a great phrase that you would use with your friends." um, and then, encouraging more formal language when we have classroom discussions, but acknowledge the importance of both. Also, please be patient with your students. Silent periods are part of the language acquisition process, and each learner is different. So I've had students who have become conversationally fluent within, 2 months, and then others who are quiet for a very long time as they're afraid to make mistakes and studying grammar structures, and then suddenly they begin speaking in full sentences and they have a level of fluency. So be patient and understand that each learner is different, but we do want to structure these activities to give them the most support. So for example, pairing newcomers with someone who speaks their language can be beneficial. It can also be detrimental, though, if they are just focusing on their native language. So often the first time that a student speaks English aloud, it could be in our class. And so that's something to celebrate. Of course, it depends on the student how you will celebrate that. But I mean, we cheer for each other. We get very excited the first time someone really speaks out loud, or definitely the first time that they present to the class. Humor helps a ton. But again, not laughing at each other. So it's important to structure these activities very carefully. Always model the activity. Try to call a student to the front of the room and act out the activity with them beforehand. Also, it's important to talk about how students will treat one another. For example, during presentations, it's crucial that they are quiet while others are presenting. And again, no laughter. They keep their questions until the end. Arranging groups can be very tricky. I believe I'm going to talk about it later, but sometimes students don't want to move. So one of the most one of the easiest ways that I've found to divide them into groups is to first ask for leaders. Say, okay, who wants to be a leader for this activity? Now you have the strong personalities and they're divided up. And then you can group students around them. Try to not move kids across the room because they might be hesitant, but first designate the leaders and then group people around them. It's very helpful. There, choose the leaders. And that's often the students who are more, they have the higher level of English and they are more communicative. So then you're giving them a task as well. Try again. Let me see where I wrote about this. Well, okay, just know that the first time you run through an activity, it might be a total mess. And that is often the nature of trying a new activity. It's so important that you try it again because even if the students are like, oh, maybe they loved it, you don't know. And once you do it the next time, it will run more smoothly. So try it more than once. Learn from your mistakes and continue. So there are a lot of ways to encourage peer conversation. Interview questions are nice, and then you can take it to the next level and allow students to then report to the class. They could either speak in first person and present as if they are the person that they just interviewed, or they could speak in the third person. Also, you could have them do a so-called interview of an imaginary person, and the class has to guess who it is. A-B worksheets, that means that each student has a sheet that has different information, so they have to ask and answer questions in order to complete their worksheets. Ask and tell cards are also very nice. These are small conversation cards, and on the back you write ask or tell, so students it helps to give them choice. So an ask would have a question that they answer, or no, ask is a question that they ask the class, their group, and then tell is something that they will share. So here's an example of an interview. Someone told me early on that students have this desire to fill out charts. It's amazing, but you give them an empty chart, for example, with the questions on the left side, and they will just need to fill out the right side. It's amazing, but this also works with graphic organizers. So here, I would probably act this out ahead of time and show sample responses. I always encourage a complete sentence, but then if you give them a chart, then they're filling out the information. Okay. So circles are also called restorative circles. It's part of restorative justice. And I do these probably once a quarter. And again, this is an example of building classroom culture. This is an example of front loading. So maybe taking the time to build that culture, and then trust me, it pays off later. But the shape of a circle is important. Of course, we can't do this now digitally, and I'll talk about that. But during non-COVID times, you would arrange the classroom in a circle. And this is important because then no one is at the front. Everyone is equal. And this is like a ritual. And so it's nice to treat it that way so that students have, something that's totally different, but that's also sort of a routine that they become accustomed to. So it's important at the beginning to give a clear, simple, honest explanation of what the circle will be. For example, you can say, today we'll be meeting in circles to learn ways to better communicate and to solve any problems we may have in the classroom. So you say the shape of the circle is important, even if we cannot sit in a perfectly round arrangement. We consider it a circle when everyone is able to see each face without having to lean forward. So another thing about circles is this format has been incredibly helpful for me with crisis response. Unfortunately, as a teacher, you learn that there will be crisis. So for example, once there was a gun scare and we had to evacuate the building, and because I teach English language learners, and at the time I had refugees in my class, they were terrified and did not understand what was happening. So afterward, we had a circle, and that was how we decompressed. We lost a student a year ago, and honestly, I found out right before school started that my student had died, and I had just a few minutes to prepare. So I came to the classroom and I was like, well, let's get in a circle. And it was beneficial to me. Other teachers sat in. Some people just needed to be quiet. But another time there were students who were being bullied in the community. And so because they were used to the format of circles, we were able to have, it was called a double fishbowl shape. So there were people in the center, and then we invited community leaders to sit on the outside. And then we conducted a circle where just the students spoke and the community leaders listened. And it was very empowering. It stopped a lot of the fighting that was happening because students felt like they were on their own and had to control a situation. And it did bring about some important change. So next, you will have a talking piece in normal non-COVID time, and that means that you only speak when you have the talking piece in your hand. Um, okay, these are some examples of talking pieces in different cultures. The next step in a circle would be this intentional opening. So you can do deep breathing. I've invited people to lead us in meditation before, which was actually surprisingly amazing. And the students who are most resistant and giggly are often the ones who fall asleep during the meditation and who need it the most. So again, this is another example of something you should try and try again. We've done stretching or movement. Students surprisingly love yoga. And then once you proceed to the next activity, they are right in tune. They've been following directions and they're, happy and relaxed. But often we do an inspirational reading. And so here's an example of one poem that we would read. And then there are the sentence stems where each student would then choose a line or lines that they appreciate and explain why it's meaningful to them. So this would be the intentional opening of the circle. Next, this is just my tradition. We talk about roses and thorns, but this is the check-in round to just find out from students, how are you doing? So here with roses and thorns, we would say, what was a rose and a thorn over the past week or two? Meaning, tell us something good that happened and tell us something not so good that happened. Now, I want to say some students are kind of timid in a circle. This is a low pressure situation. So if they say, I don't have a thorn, or you can let it go. Try to encourage everyone to answer. But also sometimes students will want to pass. Hopefully they won't just say pass for the whole time, but it happens. I forgot to say that we always pass the talking piece to the left, which is the direction of the heart. It's just one of the rituals of the restorative justice circle. Next, there's the getting acquainted piece. So here's an example that we did. And so now that students are accustomed to circles, we do it digitally. And I will just go through the list of students. I'll say, let's visualize that we're in a circle, but obviously we're doing it with technology. So we do it on a Zoom call and students take turns, but they're accustomed to the process and they feel comfortable with it. So one question that I asked this quarter is, in this new reality of, digital and hybrid learning, what are you most grateful for? And they use the sentence stems. Also, what is the hardest part of this situation for you? Here we're addressing the issues, and this is where I learned that some students did not have food, for example, or some needed hotspots or help with technology. I also, be humble. This is a time where you can learn a lot about things you can adjust to better serve your students and reach them in the classroom. Here's another example of the addressing the issues. So just finding out what their favorite activities have been and why, and then what has gone badly. And this allows them, again, this is more buy-in, more student buy-in, and they will see after the circle that you'll make changes and improve things based on their insight, and then they will like the circle even more. Some of them say this is their favorite thing that we do, and they want to do it more often. That's an option. And then at the end, you have a closing round. So you would say, what is something you've learned about someone in this circle today? Apologies, my light keeps turning off. So this is the closing round where you would talk about maybe things that you learned about people in the class or things that you understand now. And that is a circle. Some other classroom language activities or routines, and routines really benefit newcomer students the most, I would say, because it helps them be comfortable. It helps them to experience success. So obviously we talked about sentence frames. Transition words are crucial. Words of sequencing. For example, first, after that, later, and finally. But other transition words such as on the other hand, however, Classroom language, of course, we all have posters on the walls that say things like, how do you say in English? Or can I go to the bathroom, please? So don't just post those phrases on the wall, but also encourage students to say the entire phrase over and over again. Can I have a pencil, please? Thank you. Especially newcomers, because again, these are those crucial building blocks of language. With newcomers, I try to think about the information that they will need most in real life. So personal questions and answers. What is your address? Where are you from? What language do you speak? Etc. So personal questions and answers. Also, we say things like, what day is today? And I have them always answer in a complete sentence. Today is Thursday. What is the weather like? The weather is raining, etc. Responding to texts is another example of classroom language, and I'll show you two examples next. And I'm sure you all are very familiar with this, but these are all part of the lexical approach. And then agreeing or disagreeing and the language that you use for that. So this is amazing. I found it at the front of one of my textbooks, but this would be an example of agreeing or disagreeing. And these are just phrases that you can put on posters or sheets of paper or on the screen and encourage them to use the phrase in its entirety, complete sentence. Here's another article that we read about Tupac, and then students reported back using these phrases. I really like where it said, I believe that. My partner pointed out, we agreed or disagreed that. We still want to know was a nice one. So next, conversation games. I spend one day a week on conversation. Now, I want to say it is disguised reading comprehension, and it is sometimes the deepest, or it's pretty deep reading comprehension, and students might be learning idioms. It also builds community and higher order thinking skills. So not just regurgitating vocabulary, but using it in context. And it's relevant because I emphasize that these are a time when we are building community, having fun, making friends, all important things in the ESOL classroom. So first of all, it's important to demonstrate how the game works. I display the instructions during the whole activity. And so, for example, this is a nice one. You can find a snakes and ladders game board online and print it out. Often they have 100 spaces. And so then you make a list of 100 questions on a topic, or they can be basic personal questions. And the student will roll the die, and then they go to the corresponding number, and they will read the question out loud and then answer the question out loud. The group can ask follow-up questions. And it's important to prepare them and say, part of this activity is that I want you to learn new vocabulary. That's expected. There will be words you don't understand. That's a good thing. What do you do if you don't understand a word? Number one, you ask the leader of the group. Always designate a leader. Again, they'll probably be the person who would, if not a leader, they might be causing trouble and getting bored. So they're the leader. They're going to answer questions and keep the conversation going. But if the leader doesn't know, then you ask the teacher. Never just discard a question, because this is a learning opportunity, and get them excited about learning conversation. So that was a board game, but some other games that are fun is you can put someone in the hot seat. A leader often whose level is higher. They might volunteer first. And one game is don't say yes or no. So students have to ask them questions and they have to answer them honestly. And so students are asking them fast, they're answering honestly, but they cannot say the words yes or no. If they say those words, you're all like, you're out, and then they have to sit down. Often I have them choose the next person, or the person who asked the question that elicited the yes or no, then they're on the hot seat. Error correction games. So this would be like daily oral language where you show a sentence that has a lot of errors. But I like to just have a slide presentation with these and, teams. And I say each person on the team needs to answer the question. So if Jose answers first, then Ricardo needs to answer the next time around, and then Maribel, etc. But each person needs to use their voice. If you don't know the answer, that's fine. You can listen and then repeat. And that is how the newcomers often first speak, because everybody's like, come on, we need that point. Conversation cards are nice, so you can choose a topic, for example, love for Valentine's Day, or I don't know, superstitions and the afterlife for Halloween. And you will make conversation cards, put them face down, and then, the person will choose the one on the top, ask the question out loud, answer it. Maybe the whole group could answer, and then, yeah, I think it's fun. Conversation groups. So it's nice if students can work with their friends, but encourage them. It depends on the group again, but sometimes they can choose their own group that contains different languages. Encourage them to take initiative to have all different English levels. Try to communicate only in English. And then here is where I was talking about the group leaders. It's very helpful to ask for the leaders. These are often the energetic, noisy leaders. And then it's easy to cluster students around them to create groups. Otherwise, it can be very time consuming. No, I don't want to go to that group, or I don't like that group, whatever. This is faster. Research. This is an example of taking it to the next level. So I remember when we moved to Common Core, and I was really going through how the standards changed. And what I noticed is that for the most part, standards stayed pretty similar, but there was an addition of 21st century skills, which involved technology and also presentation. And so if I just was adding those elements to our normal activities, usually I was covering everything. And so, again, it's important to have the student buy-in. Explain that public speaking, you can tell a story. The first time I did a public speaking in front of a college class, I cried. Sometimes people cry. Sometimes they have all kinds of emotions, but it will benefit you all the way through school, all the way through university, and in whatever job that you have in the future. Speaking publicly is a very powerful skill to develop. Often, students will do it for the first time in your classroom, and really encourage that and celebrate it and say, hey, this is a safe space. Everybody in here is learning English, and so let's do this. So the steps that I would follow for a research that leads into presentation project would be to, I'll give you an example. So we just finished Hispanic Heritage Month, and I gave students a list of famous Hispanic people, and they got to choose. It always helps to, of course, give students choice. They got to choose who they were interested in. And then I gave them a list of criteria. This would be beginner level. And again, newcomers can do presentations, and I would highly recommend that you get newcomers in front of the room, or, well, of course, it would be a Zoom, presenting. So here they could fill in the blanks. Who did they research? Where are they from? When were they born? And when did they die? Why are they famous? The most interesting thing I learned about them. With my more advanced students, I had more expectations, so I told them to have at least 6 pages of a presentation, and then we, of course, are doing everything on Zoom. So when it was their turn to present, I made them a co-host, and they showed us, they were then able to share their screen, show us their presentation, and speak to the class. Now, one of the most important things with presentations is to give them a listening chart. And I tell them, I count a listening chart as a listening comprehension grade, and I tell them that it's going to be like a quiz or a test grade because I feel like that audience factor and having them be involved, not falling asleep, is a big deal. So here would be an example of the newcomer, the name of the famous person, what are they famous for, and why is that important? And then more advanced, I really like for students to learn each other's names. So the name of the presenter, who is the famous person, and then assigning value to the information. What is something you thought was positive? What was something interesting? What was something negative? And I show them an example of what I would consider a 100% perfect listening chart and the amount of information I want from them. And this keeps them engaged. And then often they can ask some questions at the end. So you have that dialogue. Here's another one. This is a great research topic. One year, a student during Black History Month in February, a student said, "Teacher, I don't want to research. I don't want to talk about slavery. Let's go all the way back to Africa. Let's talk about the kings and queens." I was like, my goodness, that's a good idea. So I do this every year now. We go all the way back and we talk about, of course, American history, but then African history. And so here, again, students would choose someone famous. I like to start with this article from the Atlanta Black Star. I would encourage you to look it up. But you'll want more than 10, probably, maybe 12 or 15. And you will give students a list of criteria, information that they need to find and then present to the class. And then everyone's learning from one another because they're filling out those listening charts. Here's a great one, asking them, what are 3 major events that led you to this classroom today with all of us? So what are 3 important things that have happened in your life? And I tell them they need to use transition words, and then they will present. So one group of students, I allowed them to make art. This is so beautiful. It's a little girl who began in Ukraine, said goodbye to some of her family, and then this was her school there, and then her new school. And then, or they can make digital presentations. So here's an example of someone who came from Eritrea and then moved to a refugee camp, and notice his transition words. That's a requirement of this project. Here's a picture of his actual refugee camp where he lived. But it was really fun there. He had a really positive way of describing life in Ethiopia in the refugee camp. Played a lot of soccer. Finally, they came to the United States. And then here's where they lived at the end, came to our school. Oh, and he talks about his teacher and his love for the students. Okay, so that would be the life maps story. More presentation ideas are memoirs. Again, having one picture per slide, maybe 1 to 3 sentences, requiring those transition words. And I like the memoir presentations because you allow the students then to ask questions. So it's like a reading workshop, like peer editing. So after they present, then you say, please think about the questions the class asked that they needed to know in order to better understand your story, and now add those details. People can choose to research a city or a country. One year, I noticed that the students didn't know about the community agencies and resources that were available, and so we researched and presented that. It was powerful. It was great. If you're going to do countries, it's nice to collect a list of countries that your students come from and have them choose countries that are not their own to research and present. A lot of other methods you can use. I've done open mic. I bring a microphone and a speaker, and I have a place where students can sit and they can read poems that they've written. Also, students can memorize maybe a poem or a song and sing or recite to the class. A lot of my students are really good at rap, so you could encourage them to rap along with something or give them a beat. Some people like that a lot, and that's a form of communication and speaking. Songs and singing, I didn't mention that, but talking to students about the benefit of learning songs. Once you have a song in your brain, it's there forever. I learned a song in Russian when I was in high school, and it's in my brain forever. And sometimes they make me sing it to prove that, but it's true. Songs develop fluency, they help you develop your accent, and you've got it forever. Walk around activities where you have a chart, or find someone who activity where they're walking around and asking each other questions. Those are fun. Hopefully we will get back to more normal times in the classroom where we can do that. They love controversial topics. So if you've got a group that has to talk about their opinion on some controversial topic, they totally get into that. Putting things in order as a group. So, again, assigning value, and they get to argue about it, but they have to decide on order, classifying information, prioritizing. These are all methods that will encourage conversation in class. And that is all I have for today. I hope that this has been beneficial. Hopefully you got some ideas today that you can use in the classroom right away. I want to encourage you to do speaking with your students regularly. I've heard back from parents that speaking is the most important to a lot of them. They're like, my student needs to be speaking. They're quiet. I explained to students that asking questions with your teachers is one of the best skills they can have, because then the teacher understands that you care about their class and you're present. Then they can also hear your accent and understand that you're a language learner. Also, I used to be a Spanish teacher, and the parents were so happy because they were like, wow, the kids are learning Spanish, and we know it because they're like singing all the time and they're talking all the time. And that was the result of them learning these chunks of language and then having that confidence. So that is what we want to instill in our students. I would encourage that routine, really paying attention to the ambiance, and then those sacred moments of circles are also very powerful. So thank you so much for attending my talk, and I hope that some of these ideas have been helpful. Have a good day.